everyone, and welcome back to The Apex, a weekly conversation with the titans and tastemakers of the automotive world. If you're a car enthusiast, then the name Aston Martin will need no introduction. And if you're serious about your Aston Martins, then you'll probably be familiar with our guest this week, Nicholas Mee of Nicholas Mee Co. As established Aston Martin specialist and dealer for over 25 years, Nick is one of the leading names in the space and, with the help of his expert team, provides everything from regular maintenance to full restorations of these wonderful cars, not to mention a constantly replenished stock of fine examples for sale, both classic and modern. Voted Specialist of the Year at the 2019 Historic Motoring Awards, the business has recently moved to the historic Hatfield Park estate and continues to be a reference point for Aston Martin enthusiasts. Nick, thanks very much for joining us today.
Hector, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to be on the Apex, because I've seen one or two or heard one or two of these, and I think they're wonderful, and I fully support what you're doing. So thank you.
Excellent. So to begin, I wanted to ask, where did your interest in cars come from, and what was the first proper car that you owned?
Okay. So interest in cars. Of course, I have to go back a long way to bring that one up. But it's probably, as a young lad, I was one of those rather annoying lads that used to sit in the back of my parents' car, naming every car that was coming the other way and model, etc. Don't ask me. There is, funnily enough, a bit of a family connection to all of this, in so much as my great-grandfather, who apprenticed in London as what they used to call a wheelwright and coachmaker, actually finished his apprenticeship and moved up to Hatfield, literally 2 miles from where I'm talking to you now. Mm-hmm. And he started a business in Hatfield as a wheelwright and coachmaker, and used to look after the coaches and make wheels for Lord Salisbury of the time, who's the biggest landowner in the area. And that progressed, funnily enough, through the evolution of the advent of the motor car to Gray's garages, which was in existence until the 1980s. But he went through all of that dawn of motoring, really, becoming an AA and RAC agent, and then a Morris and Austin dealership, and so on. So if you're looking for anything that's in the blood, it probably comes from my mother's side and my great-grandfather. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that since I can ever remember, cars have fascinated me. And I was a bit of a swot as a child. And then later in life got, when I got to the stage when I could actually even think about driving, I used to drive cars highly illegally on the road as a young lad. And they've just fascinated me ever since, and drew me away from further education. After leaving school at 16 or 17, whatever it was, I had no desire to continue education. It wasn't something I enjoyed, and started in the motor trade as a fitter's mate for an organisation called Henley's back in the late 60s.
Wow! And do you remember what the first motor car you owned of your own was, and happy memories? Or
yeah, it's interesting. Actually, I was trying to work this one out because it's quite. I used to go through a succession of cars with great rapidity. The first one, I think, actually was a minivan. Minivans used to be a lot of fun when you were 17 because you could be a bit reckless in them, and they were quite interesting and cheap.
I think you've got something in common with David Gandy in this instance, who I think also went through quite a few, let's say, lower performance cars in his youth, trimming edges and so on.
If you go back to the day, actually, there was more than one that I drove till they broke, and then, totally irresponsibly, you just leave it on the side of the road because they cost, like £8 or £10 or something at the time. It was a joke. Although it felt like a lot of money at the
time. So moving on to your career, you began to work at Aston Martin in the 1970s, I believe. For the benefit of our younger listeners, could you tell us what that period was like what the car enthusiast community was like and what the car market was like at the time.
Pretty interesting, actually. So I joined Aston in March 1976 after a period of time with H.R. Owen for about 18 months before that. And Aston Martin had 3 months previously, I think it was January 1976, come out of administration. The company had stopped producing cars in 1974. It was quite a splash at the time. The company had applied to the then Trade and Industry Secretary in 74 for grants to keep the business going. Those of you some of you may know, it was no surprise it wasn't forthcoming, as the Trade and Industry Secretary was Anthony Wedgwood Benn, slightly left of left, if I can put it that way. Anyway, so I joined Aston Martin in 76 and really knew very little about the brand, but I just knew that it was special and British, and I knew that they had doubled my salary. So that was worth doing. And frankly, at the time I started, it was we had a showrooms on the side of on Sloane Street, on the corner of Sloane Street and Hans Crescent. And at the time I was living in Knightsbridge, so it was very convenient, if I can put it to you that way as well. But it was a massive learning curve because Aston Martin owners and folks and the community are a fairly knowledgeable bunch, and they're very passionate about their subject. And as a young lad of, I don't know, whatever I was, 24 or something like that, starting at Aston Martin, I've very quickly found that most people, customers included, knew more about the cars than I did. So I had to learn pretty quickly. The environment, though, was interesting because in the late 70s, we had a succession of socialist governments, and we had quite high taxation, and there was the legacy of the disputes in the 70s with 3-day weeks and coal strikes and so on and so forth. So it was a difficult environment, and of course, starting at that time, trying to sell what was really already a dated product. For a company that had last been in the newspapers because they'd gone out of business. But with, some level of tenacity, we started selling motor cars. In fact, the first cars we sold were completed in 1976, but they'd actually sat on the line for 2 years. So they had to be finished and then sold, and then eventually the product got better and better. But it was a tough gig, but an enjoyable one because of the people that I was working with, and because of the customers who I was meeting, who are, regardless of them being a bit more knowledgeable on the product than me in those days, quite good fun to be around.
Yeah, it must have been quite an experience. When
you asked me though about what was the collector car scene at the time. I think it's probably best if I say to you that the collector car scene at that time was nowhere near the size that it is today. We were talking in those days about, collector enthusiasts tended to be a very small minority. People bought cars, ran them for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and then they just kind of binned them or, flogged them or got whatever they could for them. People weren't buying cars and restoring them. And there wasn't an industry. A restoration done in those days would have been done by a bloke, in his garage on the side of the house, in a set of overalls, buying whatever parts he could get in the main. And the classic car industry didn't really kick off until you got way into the 80s, not with any magnitude anyway.
That's very interesting. And speaking of the people you worked with, I know you worked with Victor Gauntlett at various points in your career. Obviously, a huge influence on Aston Martin. Could you tell us about him and the kind of influence he had on you? and the company, and what sort of environment he created, what it was like working with him.
Yeah, well, Victor, larger-than-life character and a great man, who ultimately became a great mentor to me and a great friend, and very sad his passing. I first met Victor when he called into the Sloane Street showrooms one day, where I had a Daytona for sale, and we, over the course of the day, eventually negotiated a deal, and he bought that from me, a particularly fine car it was too. And he thereafter became quite a good client, actually, for a couple of years, until the first time. That was for non-Ferrari cars that we used to sell occasionally, non-Aston cars. So. And one day I was trying to sell him an Aston. I went down to his offices in Farnham, and he was highly critical of the car. But we managed to get a deal done. And then fairly promptly afterwards, I found out he had been in conversation with Alan Curtis, and who was one of the four people who had invested in the company up until that time, and got involved in business. And I was delighted because Victor was a guy who you could do business with. He was a guy that didn't sit on the fence. You knew where you were with him. He didn't suffer fools gladly. And if you did your job and you were courteous and got on with things and had a strategy and so on, he was very supportive. And the man himself, when I say he was a mentor, I kind of, in working with him, used to follow his thought process and the way he worked. And you learn. And I learned a great deal from Victor. Yeah.
I read somewhere that he was also the person who managed to negotiate the James Bond connection with Aston.
Yeah, well, that was, where are we now? Sort of 1984, I think it was.
A bit later, yeah.
There was, Eon Productions were going to make another Bond film, and they wanted to use an Aston. And it started off with the loan of actually a car that was part of our used car stock, which it spiraled actually into much as they then wanted to have three more. It was a convertible. They wanted to have three more coupes that they could sling around and so on. So three very second-hand cars were purchased and blown over in Cumberland grey, and the interiors, I think the guys just opened the doors and blasted black paint everywhere. They were very crude, but they were very effective. And funnily enough, out of that though, Victor was offered a role in the film, which was kind of interesting. He turned it down, but they wanted him to be the one of the Russian generals or something.
That's quite incredible.
At the time, he was a busy guy. That was a man who used to be at the office in Newport Pagnell at 6:37 in the morning, and very often would conduct his business for the day and then come down to London and drop into the showrooms later in the afternoon and carry out more meetings. So, there's no way. I can't imagine he would have had the time to hang around on a film set playing at a Russian colonel.
I just love the idea that James Bond, approved use Aston Martins. If it's good enough for him, it's good enough for anyone.
Well, it's a bit of mythology busting, actually, because it's always thought of as that particular car, the convertible, was Victor's, but in fact it wasn't. It really doesn't matter. It was a great car, and it set the tone, and it did a lot of good for Aston Martin at the time.
It's very interesting indeed. And just to talk about the cars of the era and maybe clear up a few rumours we've heard over the years. So first question is it true that the love them, hate them 76 Wedge Lagondas were the saviour, as it's said, of Aston Martin at the time? And is it also true that those digital dashboards that they had, which were kind of a pioneering development, are actually incredibly difficult to repair now?
Okay, yes to both. The Lagonda is very interesting because it's much derided, and yes, it's a Marmite car. I remember being on the show stand in Earl's Court when it was announced. People queued to order that car. It was on the front page of the Telegraph and the Times and various publications of the day. It was big news. And it was big news because it was dramatic looking and the use of electronics. So Aston were really a bit they had to continue with this electronic route, even though it was a very problematic thing. In answer to the first question, though, the order bank for the Lagonda was massive, and the car was late, and people hung in there waiting for it. Yes, it was a big export car to the Far East, the Middle East, and the United States, and brought in money, which the V8s in the day weren't. And don't forget, in those days there wasn't a convertible V8, which is what the United States market wanted. Or they don't buy coupes; they like convertibles. That was always the thing. And without Lagonda, I can categorically tell you, Aston Martin would not have passed 1981 without folding again, because it was the money spinner. And of course, in 1981, the range by then was the V8, the Vantage, and the Volante. But it was an old car. It was not new, cutting edge technology. It was showing its age, and it wasn't. It was later in the 80s that it became retrospectively a fashionable car again. But in answer to the electronics, yes, they are notoriously difficult to fix. And the problem isn't so much the understanding of it, it's just actually the componentry. And this is a concern for electronics in cars generally, is as the technology moves on apace, the manufacturers of the chips and bits and pieces that go into making electronic devices no longer make those chips and bits and pieces because there's no need for them anymore. It's becoming a bit of an issue, actually, as the classic car world moves on and we get more involved in some of the more modern cars. Is finding the electronic items to make them work, or actually repairing electronic items to make them work.
Yeah, it must take quite a talented technician as well to dig through that stuff and know which parts will.
Yeah. It's and again, it's one of those things where repairs to these dashboards and touch sensitive stuff very often were carried out by a specialist, in inverted commas, which was normally a 1 or 2 man band in a little workshop somewhere that you'd send the item off to and get him to fix it, and it would come back. But of course, these guys, they move on and they pass away, and
knowledge goes.
We've got a problem.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the other question I had, it was about the 1990s era V8s and Virages. They seem to be coming back into popularity now. And I know that you've sold some very special iterations of them, including the V550, the V600, the Vantage Le Mans car. What's your take on that era of Aston Martin, and which iterations are, in your opinion, the ones to have? So
the what you might call the Virage era, cars really from 1990 onwards. Early Virages were perhaps, in fact, definitely underdeveloped, and I think that's generally accepted around the place. But at the end of the day, they do work in the main, and they're quite comfortable, and they are have been built in very small numbers, and they're a coach-built car. They're very accessible from a financial point of view to collectors, but you do have to be very careful with them that you're not buying something that's going to cost you a lot of money to keep on the road. The later cars, though, and by that I mean things like the supercharged Vantage and the V8 coupes and the convertibles that came, are a much better car than the early Virage. They benefited from a great deal of development and money actually being thrown at them by the then owners of Aston Martin, the Ford Motor Company, who were pretty pathological about improving quality of those cars. And so they're quite exciting cars. They're kind of out of their time, if I can put it that way, because it was a formula that goes back to Victor's days. In fact, I was part of a team that signed off on the supercharged Vantage in 1991 before I left Aston Martin. And that car was always to Victor a spiritual successor to his favourite car of all time, which was a blower Bentley. And it's the same sort of philosophy, if you like. If you want to make a car go faster, take it and strap on a couple of great big superchargers and put some fat tyres on it, and off you go. A bit like Bentley, or a bit like that happened with Bentleys and the supercharged, as opposed to going down the sort of more Bugatti-esque type route of making it smaller and lighter to make it go faster. It was Victor's way. And they're slightly irrelevant to the day, but that's part of their charm. They exist, and they're really rather magnificent cars. So a very comfortable place to sit, great on long journeys, very powerful. You do get a sense of being sort of king of the road in a way, which is part of what that car is all about.
And I wanted to ask as well, you obviously in the course of your business, you see a lot of customers of various stripes. Is there a difference in taste and attitude between, well, you might say, older Aston Martin collectors and a younger generation who, of course, went around back in the days of the 90s?
Yeah, I think that, well, there is actually. I mean, across the board, collectors these days do have extraordinarily high expectations of quality, which can be very difficult to meet because, after all, a car, it's born one day, it's brand new, and then it goes out in the field and it gets wet and it's dry and it's damp and it's hot and it's cold. I mean, it's a pretty hostile environment that cars live in. And so that's a difficult one, particularly for what we term the new era collector. And for us in our world, the new era collector is someone who's buying cars that were Gaydon built cars. So on the VH chassis architecture. And there is a number of cars in the various different models that have been built that are special editions, whether they're ultimates or carbon editions or UB20s or Bond editions or whatever. And these are quite interesting cars to collectors. And frankly, the new era collector can put together, 3 or 4 of those types of cars in the main for the price of a DB4 or DB6. And so you can see where the interest lies. But those guys, they really just want perfection, and that is something that we try to provide for them. And we do try and keep a stock of those interesting cars rather than run-of-the-mill. Not always possible, but we try. On what you might call the older cars, let's say Newport Pagnell built cars, I think in the main that most people, when they approach these, they do understand that they were a very limited production car, hand built. They're all a bit different, and to some degree on a scale of budget that the new era car far exceeds. So they're a little more willing to accept that they may not be buying perfection. But yes, it's a slightly different world. It's a different buyer as well, frankly.
Do you ever see people trying to dip their toes one way or the other? I'd imagine there's a bit of kind of customer education you have to do if you're, if you're used to the new era of Aston Martin, then you think, you know what, I'd quite fancy one of the older ones. Although, yeah,
well, a lot of people do have a broad selection. They go, well, I've dipped my toe in the water and I've got a new era car, and I really aspire to having a DB6 or a DB5 or maybe a V8 Vantage. It's a dangerous game to just sort of pigeonhole people into one particular era of car. And we have several clients who have a broad spectrum spanning all the ages. But if you do try and delineate it, though, the new era collector is a younger guy. The cars are less expensive, so it's no surprise. And they're probably, at the beginning of that journey of collecting motor cars, whereas people that are buying into, £400,000 DB4s or V8 Vantages at 350,000 or whatever, it's more serious money. Or if you get up to DB5s and 4GTs or any of the convertibles, you're probably dealing with a guy who's a bit more seasoned, going to be, to some degree, more understanding because they are, how can I put it, a little more grounded and have had experience of older cars in the past and know what to look for, and are going to be more appreciative of a good car with good history and no question marks. Nobody wants to have an old DB or whatever and have to explain what it is to people. They just want it to say what it is and for it to have a clean bill of health and a good history.
So I think this is kind of answering another question I had, which is what should people who are taking their first steps into that classic world of proper collectors, Aston Martins, what should they be mindful of? I wouldn't say wary of, just mindful.
This is going to sound a bit like a sell line, but it is just completely true. What they should not be wary of is buying the best they can, and don't be afraid to spend the extra money to get the best quality, because it has been proven time and time and time again that is the cheapest form of classic car ownership. We are constantly battling people who approach the subject and they become overnight experts, and they start thinking about getting an old motor car, a collector's car, and they look at prices and they see that there's maybe a 25% spread on pricing. And they're naturally drawn to try to find something that's at the lower end of the price scale, which is understandable. But what they don't understand always is that they're going to spend that difference in bringing it up to a good standard, but then it's still got the poor history or it's still got the high mileage. So my only recommendation, and I know it's been said before, to any would-be collector is buy the very best you can and don't be afraid to spend that little bit extra to get the right car in the first place. It is the most economic route.
That's very, very wise words there. And taking a step back, talking about Nicholas Mee and Company, the business, it's recently moved to the Hatfield House estate in Hertfordshire after being based in West London. What prompted that move, and what does the new site give you that London couldn't? I'm sure for car owners, we've all got an opinion.
You're liking your big subjects here. Right, London. I, have always, up until we moved up here, been in favour of London as a base. Always mindful that going back to the 1980s and 90s, Jack Barclays used to sell, Bentley or Rolls-Royce used to sell over 60% of the UK destined product through Jack Barclays in Berkeley Square. Oh, wow. People in those days from Newcastle, Manchester, Birmingham, wherever Leeds, if they wanted to buy a new Rolls or Bentley or Aston, would come to London and they'd make a weekend of it and stay at the Connaught and go and see a show and so on and so forth. But London's changed, and actually the attitude to London has changed. People from outside London actually no longer aspire to want to go to London because actually it's a fuss, and there's cameras and there's parking charges and there's fines for this and fines for that. So it's become quite a difficult thing. And also the environment is so busy and it's so crowded. We got to a point with the business in when was it now, about 14, 15, where despite having two locations, one which was dedicated workshop, and the showrooms that we had in the Goldhawk Road, we were just bulging with cars, and you can't leave them on the street in London, and you can't. It's just you're constantly hemmed in. We were faced with a situation. One of the buildings that we owned, we'd sold, which helped expand the business in 2010 and 11. And taken a lease back on that, and that was now coming up, and the new owners of the building wanted to develop it. So we had to do something about one of our premises. And we could have, opened up workshops in Park Royal or something like that, but we'd still be in an environment that was a bit hostile and beholden to institutional landlords, and not have any outside space or space for additional parking. Someone said to me many years ago, interesting this, he was a jeweler. He said, if you're in the jewelry business and you want to double the size of your business, you just buy another safe. Well, in the car business, if you want to expand your business, you've got to have some space.
Yeah.
So we did a big deep dive about how to solve this problem, and we got offered the opportunity to do something up here in Essendon, just outside Hatfield, which was quite special in so much as it's an old 250-year-old farmstead that was dilapidated and could have been developed for mixed use. But we took the whole site, and a lot of money was spent developing it for specific needs of workshops and showroom. It's 2 acres approximately, and it's a massive benefit to us. The probably one way I can quantify this, and I've said it to many people, within a week of moving here, it was evident we've done the right thing. People in London, but let's say I'm in London, the phone goes, "Oh, Nick, I can see you've got this V8 or DB6 for sale. It looks quite nice. Like to come and see it. Where are you based?" "Oh, we're in London." So, okay, I'll just give that a moment's thought and get back to you, because it's London. That's the first barrier. And if they were coming to town, they'd come and see us, but they'd probably be or would have planned to do 2 or 3 things on the day: visit the Coates manager, go and see their lawyer, drop their wife at Harrods, whatever else. Yeah. And of course, you never get from A to B in London in 20 minutes. So
it's always at least 45, isn't it?
They'd arrive late,
door. Yeah,
and frazzled, and you'd have a 45-minute window to show them a £500,000 motor car and try and get a decision out of them, which is tricky. Especially when they're saying, "Well, can I just drive the car?" Yes, of course you can, but it's 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, and it's speed bumps, and there's bus lane cameras, and Uber drivers, and Ocado delivery vans, and so on. When we moved up here and we started receiving visitors in May 18, what we were actually looking at our watches after 2 hours, thinking, when can we get on with the rest of our day? And it's because we are the destination, and what we've developed here is a destination where there's plenty for people to see, and we like to show people around. We like people to arrive, and we like to sit them down, have a cup of coffee, and calm down, and after their journey, and show them around, show them what we do, show them the cars, have good conversation, and then if we want to go out in the car, we open the gates, and guess what? We're on some lovely roads. So that was good from the sales point of view, but also from the guys in the workshops point of view, because in London, say we've just done a suspension rebuild on a car, technician's got to get in that car, and to road test it properly, he's got to go out of London. So he's in it for 2 hours to check this thing out properly. And frankly, how many of our clients want to spend 2 hours technicians' labour for them driving there? It just doesn't work in London anymore. And frankly, in 5 minutes, with particularly these older cars, if you drive one out of the showroom, you're in for a charge every day, according to this zone that's coming in from our friend Sadiq Khan. So it doesn't make sense being in London anymore. This is a much nicer environment, and we found that visitors and clients that come here enjoy it. We also can do events, and this is something that I've seen for a long time as an important issue. And to put that into context, to some degree, certainly from the sales side here, I've always said to the guys, look, we're if you want to use chess as an analogy, we're in the business of selling the chess pieces. And the people that buy them, they need a chessboard to go and play on. And so we encourage, and we have here during the course of any 1 year, 3 or 4 events through our own event side, which is, we gave it a title, 10 to 2. It's a Saturday thing. People come along and, have some sausage rolls and coffees and kick tires and meet other like-minded people and so on. We do regular events with Aston Martin Owners Club members from the area. And we've had groups of people from Piston Heads and Supercar Driver and so on. When you've got the space that we have, you can do that. And people will travel because it's not London. If we were saying to people, Supercar Driver, for instance, would you like to bring 30 of your people down for a Saturday and we can go through the workshops and this, that and the other? Oh, yeah, love to, but where are you? London. No, thanks.
Yeah.
So this is the great thing. We've got space here, lots of parking, sheep in the field next door, and people enjoy coming here, and we enjoy having them here. It's not all about a hard sell. It's all actually about a community, and we like to embrace the community and be part of it and participate in it.
It's that community aspect I think is really interesting, at least all the Aston owners I've ever known can't get enough of these events. We meet up with people, as you said, coffee and a bacon roll, and it's just a lovely morning or afternoon.
Yeah, and in a relaxed way, and those sorts of free form and open conversations can result in business sometimes. But as I say, that's not really what it's all about. It is a community that we operate in, and to be honest, most Aston owners are quite pleasant folks as well, so we enjoy it.
So, Nick, we're coming up on time, so I've just got some quick fire questions left for the end. The first one is, what's your greatest driving experience? Yes, difficult one, that one.
I think we've probably all got driving experiences that memories and memorable cars that we've driven, and mine include, 27 RSs and Daytonas and Stratoses and things like that from the 80s. And I've had some fantastic drives across Europe in different Astons, several trips down to Le Mans. To actually say what is your greatest drive, very difficult. But certain ones that stick out in my mind are trips to Le Mans. Probably one of the better ones was about 3 or 4 years ago, where we had I think I was driving a DB9 and 3 or 4 guys in Vanquishes, and we were all heading down to Le Mans. And we decided as we entered France to put into the Google Maps no autoroutes, no tolls, etc., and it gave us a route that was entirely cross-country. And, of course, there was no one on it, and we just went hell for leather, really irresponsibly. But it was a great drive. That's a more recent one. But lots of drives down to the south of France in cars. I don't have one particular. Lots of track events and so on, but it's difficult to pinpoint one. It's unfair. It's
the magic of the sat-navs now, where you end up in some bit of rural France. You're the only car for miles, and the road is great, and you just you can have fun. It's
I'd recommend doing that to anybody. Set the nav, no auto routes, no toll roads. It takes you through all these little villages and these wonderful French roads with nobody on them. Absolutely. And no speed guns.
So second quickfire question is, what is your favourite car marque other than Aston Martin?
Well, I've had a succession of Mercedes-Benz, but that's not because they're the most exciting car. It's just that actually I've always had a great deal of respect for their engineering skills and the cars that they produce, particularly in the 80s. Several Cosworths and E500s and that sort of stuff. Yeah. So I have a great deal of respect for Mercedes.
But if we're talking about fun, what would your pick be?
Most fun car. Well, it gets very tricky, this. I mean, probably the more than fun, actually, was actually one of the trips I went down to Le Mans. I drove a D-type Jaguar there and back. That was an extraordinary experience to do. And also a short drive in the original DBR2. That's fun when you've got 300 odd horsepower in something that weighs 800 kilos with reasonable brakes and skinny tires. That is fun. If you're asking about a contemporary car that managed to sort of fill that criteria a bit, I was invited by Alpine down to Goodwood 18 months ago or so, and I had a tremendous time in those little A110s. I think they're a great little car.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate because that's the way sports cars should be going, but it's not the way manufacturers have been going. And it doesn't seem as if they're going to go that way. But I think they're a fantastic little car because you can actually make it dance. I've got to think about cars that I like to be able to make them dance, and with excessive amounts of power and traction control, you can't.
Yeah, I think Gordon Murray, for that reason, has bought one as well. I think he runs an Alpine.
Yeah, if I could think of a reason to use it regularly, I'd buy one too.
I think that's the problem they've been facing, but we can talk about that another time. Yeah. So, last quick-fire question is: what do you prefer, a patinated classic car or a gleaming, fully restored example?
From a personal point of view, I quite like something that's got a little bit of use to it, so long as it's mechanically strong and safe. And that's quite difficult because a lot of people won't spend money making their car strong and safe without doing the cosmetics as well. There is something about a gleaming, fresh, brand newly restored car that's a bit tricky because you are suddenly custodian of some form of perfection. And if you start using it the way that you might want to use it, as you would and should, a sports car, then you are going to start devaluing that car to some degree. But I understand it from the point of view that as investments, people are going to want cars in as beautiful condition as possible and to maintain it that way. But that's not for me personally, that's not the most fun. Most fun is to be able to get in the car and make it dance.
I think that's a great answer. So, Nick, I think that's all we've got time for today, unfortunately. So that just leaves me to thank you for such a fascinating chat. And hopefully we'll be able to visit you guys up at Nicholas Mee Company in the near future.
Hector, thank you very much. There is an open invitation whenever you'd like to. So, I can't always guarantee the sheep are going to be in the field. That's all. Next door, which is always a pleasure to look at. But thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I shall look forward to listening to myself, I suppose, at some point. Thanks, Hector, very much.
Cheers.
Bye.